Mike for Spokane 2019 Issues and Priorities. These are issues and priorities that I believe the Spokane citizens, voters, and most importantly, candidates standing for elected office in the Spokane area should be focused on and be thoroughly informed on. Number one is the jail, and this is going to bleed into law enforcement issues and the prosecutor's issues, but essentially in the jail, 4 years ago during the last campaign, there were a number of deaths in the jail, and that has continued for 4 or 5 years. There's roughly a death every other month, almost all of them attributed to suicide. Big problem. Something's going on there. A year ago, this time last year, we were at 1 a month. I ended up taking a closer look at the jail. There was a couple of deaths right after that, and then it stopped around the first of the year, a little bit before, when we had a change in the jail's management. Hopefully this is under control. There's just too many deaths, too many suicides for me to believe. Whatever you think about people that are incarcerated or brought into the jail, they're still human beings. They still have families. They still, most of them are members of our community. When they're in the care of the state, the local government, it's our responsibility to keep them alive. They should not be dying in our care. For that reason, I want everyone paying attention to the jail. There's some talk about a major remodel or even a new jail. I don't think we necessarily need that. There is room for some improvements. I think there should be some remodels, the way they process stuff in there, but the jail is very important. It's one of my top priorities, less so now that these fatalities have stopped. I don't think, to my knowledge, there hasn't been one in 6-8 months. Marked improvement. Thank you very much, whoever's paying attention in there, but that needs to stop. This all evolves out of law enforcement issues, and one primarily had to do with the Ryan Holick fatality a few years ago. At the time of the last campaign, there was a big dust-up about an officer, a deputy, who ran over a kid. He was doing 70 miles an hour without his lights on. And then we spent the next 3 years arguing about it, that the law enforcement was defending it. And the sheriff, the independent Spokane Police Department investigation, and the Washington State Crime Lab all said that the officer didn't hit this kid. And in the end, it turned out he did. And I'm not really trying to run down the officer that was involved. I don't have any I don't believe he intended to run the kid over. Things happen. The kid did run against a red light. My bigger problem is why either all these law enforcement agencies were lying, or that's some really bad police work. In the end, it's probably cost us a couple of $1 million to sort all that stuff out. When I go to the county prosecutor's office, there was, I couldn't even get the investigation report. They weren't going to release it at all once they decided not to file charges. Then it was going to be a year. I had to go down to the city council, and I talked to the council president, Ben Stuckard, who said that he would make this independent investigation that pretty much absolved the officer available, and he did. It took him about a month, but he got it to me, and I immediately took it to 2 or 3 experienced law enforcement, and they're all saying it stinks. And so I was in the process of getting independent accident forensic specialists involved when the Washington State Crime Lab came back and says, oh no, there's an imprint of the kid's hat on the bumper. It's pretty clear that the officer ran this kid over. I'm not after the officer. What a horrible thing. I know he didn't mean to do it. That's not really where I'm going. This accountability is, how did they arrive at that conclusion that was totally false, and why did they perpetuate that for a 3 years is something I want to go back and look at. Same thing with the prosecutor, and I'll have individual videos on all of these, probably 2, 3, dealing with a number of law enforcement and prosecutor issues that I think anybody that's running for elected office should be looking closely at. The third thing here, third or fourth thing, would be property taxes and assessed values. Now, I've already sat down with the county assessor, the new county assessor. They acknowledge there's a problem, but we have huge discrepancies in property tax assessments and increases. Smaller, $150,000, $250,000 homes are seeing 30, 40, 50 or more % increases over 5 or 6 years, where banks, malls, hotels, the big commercial interests, they're seeing their assessed values go up 1 or 2% or even dropping. This is even after they sell on the market at a huge premium to the assessed values, and still their property doesn't go up. We have $1 million condos that haven't paid any property taxes for 10 years, but our senior citizens, they continue to bear the burden increasingly more. And now that we have these huge tax raises at the state, everyone's going to see big increases in their residential property rates, residential property assessments. But what about the commercial interests? What about the wealthiest people in town? How come they're not paying their share? So I'll have a video on that coming up a little bit, and I've already had a video in the can done with the county assessors, and he acknowledges the problem. So we want to focus on that. The next one would be GCCM, contract management. It stands for General Contractor Construction Management. I want them banned. What they do is it's too easy to rig bids, manipulate the outcomes, and it's costing the city tens of millions of dollars or more over the years for public works contracts, and regionally it could easily be $100 million. I'll have a video on that showing how these contracts are manipulated. These public work contracts are used to inflate the cost to the city. White collar crime, that's the next one. We're known for white collar crime. Forbes has written articles called Scam Capital of America. People here cannot defend themselves against white collar crime. It doesn't really matter if you have a written contractor or not. You're unlikely to have an attorney that's going to actually represent you and not bleed you to death. Too many attorneys are predators on their own clients. I'm going to be talking to the prosecutor's office more about this. We need a division to deal with white collar crime because it drives investment out of our community. In my opinion, we need to start disbarring a number of attorneys. There used to be, we had a bar association that was kind of an oversight, but even that's turned political, and that's got issues of corruption too. If we want to attract investment, expand our economy, and have people, businesses grow here, you got to take care of white collar crime. Only the wealthiest people with established lawyers can defend themselves. Everybody else is they'll bankrupt you. The huge injustice that happened in this town in Spokane involving white collar crime is unconscionable. We need to get a handle on that. I've spoken, the next one is solid waste system. I've spoken in the past about the abuses there, how expensive it is, and the mismanagement of that, and I'll have a video specifically on that. The soaring cost of government is the next thing. Government has become basically a massive wealth transfer. People say, oh, you have to have roads and you have to have this. Well, yes, we do, but that is such a small fraction of the money we spend. Almost all the money that we're spending for government goes into somebody's pocket. And when I first ran for mayor 12 years ago, the general fund was, I think, approaching $100 million, give or take, right in there. 4 years later, the entire budget, which is hard to sort out, was something like $470 million. Now it's over $1 billion. And that's just the city budget. It doesn't count a lot of other funds and regional governments. When you start adding up the state, the federal, the county-wide stuff, and most of this will fall on the citizens, you're probably looking at $4 or $5 billion a year in the Spokane County. $40, $50 billion in 10 years, we are not getting that kind of value out of our government. And we need to redouble our efforts on how we get efficient government, but also the accounting. I have very good research people trying to sort out the county and the city's accounting and accounting information, and it is a hobbled mess. It is very hard to figure out. We need better transparency and usable financial information that the average person can at least see a summary of how we are spending money in Spokane. These other issues are important, but they're not the priority, but they're definitely important. And I spoke about the PDC and the abuses of the PDC in another video. I'll have more information on that, but basically it affects electoral outcomes and influences our government, and it's doing it somewhat improperly, and I'll speak to that a little bit later. News and media has been a big problem in the past because we had one dominant news source that was pretty much getting people elected here. If you gave money to the right news source, they write articles about you to get your name out there. If you don't give them money, you go by the wayside, and you even get negative articles sometimes. That was in the past. Now with the new social medias, other sources, the dominant media is not nearly so dominant. I'm guessing that media organization's probably actually been losing money the last 10 years. So it's important because we need accurate reporting on what's going on with our government. but I'm not as concerned as I was in years past because we're getting competition. It's slow, and that's really the point. We want multiple sources working to provide the stories, and we don't want to be dependent on just one dominant media when it comes to electing our representatives. There's a few other things here. Avista, the whole Avista thing about the transfer of the Vista, the takeover with Hydro One, that was a terrible thing. It was going to be, we're going to transfer a lot of taxpayer-funded infrastructure. Probably, I don't think you could replace it for $50 billion today, and it was going to go for $5 billion to reestablish those corridors, to build those dams, to do everything that they have. Now, I understand it. Vista is a private company managing those resources, but those resources were paid by taxpayers and local ratepayers, and to transfer that to another country, to another sovereign government or a company in another government was. That was a horrible thing, and so my thank you to all the people that fought that and got that stopped. And now there's efforts underfoot, and I'll have a video on this a little later too, about keeping control of our critical energy infrastructure local. The people that pay the taxes, the people that pay the utility rates, we want control kind of at that level. We don't want to go to another country to ask them for permission on what we do with our own utilities here. Sanctuary cities. Now, I talked about it during the last campaign. This is a big threat to our sovereignty. That's a big question about law and order. Recently, the governor has come out and declared the state of Washington a sanctuary city. Our sheriff, Ozzie Knezovich, has taken him to task on that, and he's absolutely right to do so. It's like, what do our law enforcement do if they can't enforce the law? And how do we know which laws we're going to enforce? Some politician's just going to decide he's not going to follow federal law. It sends a terrible message to the rest of us. So I thank the sheriff for driving that issue. It's not a racist thing. It's not an anti-immigration thing. But people that come here illegally should not have more rights and powers than people that actually live here and pay the taxes. If you're going to come here, be a citizen, you come here legally, but to live in the shadows for years or decades, that's not right, and thank you, Sheriff, for pursuing that. Homelessness. You're going to hear a lot of stuff about homelessness. It's a very emotional issue, but the things that I talked about previous to this, these other priorities, is what leads to homelessness. It leads to higher cost of homes. It leads to a higher cost of government. It drives the poverty. If you can't take care of your city business, how are you going to walk out there and take care of the homeless issue? When you're elected to run the city, to manage those affairs, you need to run the city efficiently, so we bring in more investment, that we create more jobs, and we create more affordable housing. But what you do is you drive out investment when you favor a few and are abusive to the many. And that's what's happening in Spokane, which is why all the growth is not really in Spokane much. It's going to be out in the West Plains, it's going to be in Post Falls, it's going to be towards Idaho, the valley, but not in the city so much. Most of the activity, the construction, and the new building and stuff is almost all public works, the big chunk of it. And that's taxpayer-funded stuff. And last,